Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of Next Big Thing HQ, where we interview founders and showcase startups that are raising capital via Reg CF. We have an amazing founder on today, Mariam Nusrat. Now, you have quite an impressive resume and have several very impressive awards that I want to list off. Forbes Next 1000 Entrepreneur, a 2-time TEDx speaker, a keynote speaker at DC Startup Week 2023, and the winner of Entrepreneur Elevator Pitch Season 10 and David Meltzer 2-Minute Drill TV show. So Mariam, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Connor. It's an absolute pleasure. And thank you for doing that research and just like giving me a platform to share the Breshna story. I appreciate it.
Of course. We're happy to have you on. And I think it's only appropriate since you've won so many awards giving a 2-minute, 60-second elevator pitch that you give us your 60-second elevator pitch about Breshna.
Okay. You know what? You want to do this? All right, Connor. So there's a 60-second pitch, which I did on TV. They actually put you in an actual elevator. So while I'm not in an elevator, I will give it to you. And I hope I remember all of it. So here we go. Did you know that you can make your own video games in less than 15 minutes? Hi, I'm Mariam Nusrat, and I'm transforming the gaming industry so that people like you and I can make our own video games without writing a single line of code. Our platform, Breshna.io, creates games with no code at zero cost and at lightning speed. So think about a math teacher that wants to make learning fun. She can make her own run and catch game where kids are catching even numbers and dodging odd numbers and having a blast. It's like the Canva for purposeful gaming. Now, we've only been incorporated for a little over 2 years and we've made mad progress. 170,000 registered game makers, more than 6 million gameplays, $2.5 million raised from investors like Paris Hilton and Randy Zuckerberg, and an AI-powered text-to-game engine and a Web3-enabled metaverse launching next quarter. We're on a journey to empowering the next 100 million people so they can tell their stories through video games. And the question is, are you game?
I'm game. So that was great. Thank you. I think the biggest question is, why are games so important for learning? What's the difference or the impact that a game serves compared to just a normal lecture?
Yeah, I love that, Connor. So interestingly, I come at this from spending 15 years at the World Bank in education policy making, right? So I worked across 22 different countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Middle East, where I was working on education policy. And I realized that often, unfortunately, the learning tools we have and the way learning is done in most of the classrooms around the world is not interactive and often very boring, right? And everything. I grew up playing games like SimCity, where I was learning about urban planning without even knowing I was learning about urban planning. And that left like an impact on my brain that far transcended those virtual boundaries in which I was playing these games. So I think I was very intrigued by the iterative and inspiring and interactive nature of games as learning tools, right? And everything. So 8 years ago, I actually started my own gaming studio. I'm non-tech myself. I'm originally from Pakistan. I'm based out of the US in Washington, DC. And I got on the phone with my brother and I was like, you know what? I think there's an opportunity to unleash the power of video games for positive behavior change in the context of international development. So if it's learning or also behavior change. And one of the first games we actually made, Connor, was a period game, a menstrual health game, where you're catching pads with a pair of undies and then you're busting menstrual myths, right? It's like literally like you catch the candy kind of a game and everything. Yeah. And it had a huge impact. And what we realized was that, when you engage people, so there's this very cool saying that goes, tell me and I will forget, show me and I may remember, involve me and I will understand, right?
Love that.
And I think involving people in the journey of their learning, and that's what games do. They're immersive. You go into it. You get exposed to the interactive storyline, but then you also get the message again and again and again. It's iterative, right? So that's where we realized the power of video games. And that was around 8 years ago. And we've never looked back. Like we started from a gaming studio and then we were like, you know what? We need to build a platform where we're not the game makers, but everyone can make their own video games. So that's unleashing the power of video games for learning.
And so you built Breshna, which is the platform that allows the video game creators and then the users to come on the platform to play the games and then to create the games for users to play the games. And you have 170,000 video game creators. That's awesome. And then you also have 6 million gameplays. So can you walk us through how this traction has occurred and kind of, I'm assuming that there's some sort of flywheel effect where once it gets going, it slowly starts to build up and get faster, and then more and more people start to come on. So can you walk us through that flywheel effect that's happening on the platform?
100%, Connor. So when we started building Breshna, so like the gaming studio was more of a not-for-profit play. That was the world I was comfortable with, international development, service-based studios and all of that. And then we came into this world of venture-backed tech startups. And this is my first tech startup. I mean, first time as a founder and everything. And for me, we kind of threw spaghetti at the wall, right? So we built our first MVP within 45 days of incorporating. And it was like such a basic model. It only had 3 templates. So you could make like a run and catch game, or you could make like, it's like a Mythbuster game. And there was like another game that was like similar, but you were also catching things. And we just threw spaghetti at the wall. We were like, we've no idea what people are going to use this for. And it was wild that the use cases, we had 6,000 video games created in the first 96 hours. It was absolutely insane for us. And this was with $0 of marketing spent, right? It was simply because I was building in public on Twitter, and we had a community and some like schools and everything that were like kind of watching this. And what we realized was people were making all kinds of games. So on the entertainment side, people made like Trevor Noah games, makeup, Halloween, prom proposal, birthday wishes, sports trivia. Then in education, people made science, math games and everything. Kind of like, that example I gave, if you want to make like, a Super Mario game where you're catching even numbers or dodging odd numbers, you can do that on Breshna. And then we had like social impact, financial literacy, animal welfare, health awareness games, nutritional games. And then we had marketing and training games. So like people were making games like 10 things about my startup, or like do a Mythbuster about like, what I'm building and everything. And so we realized that there's this huge demand for snackable content, right? I mean, we're in the generation of TikTokers, right? And everything. And people want to have snackable content, fast content. And video games are a universal language. Like, it's not just the West. People around the world, there's 1 billion video game players around the world. So we were like, how do we empower everyday people to be able to make their own video game? So I think what you said, Connor, about the flywheel effect, like our cost of acquisition to date has been less than $1. What our users do is imagine one math teacher. She makes video games. She makes one math game. And basically with Breshna, you have to have an account to make a game, but it's completely free. You make an account, you make your game. It's lightning fast. Breshna actually means lightning in the Pashto language, which is my mother tongue. So you make a game in less than 15 minutes, and then you publish it as a simple URL link. So the teacher sends it on her WhatsApp group, right? It's one URL link. It's nothing. She sends it on her WhatsApp group. And then like 20 kids play it. And just like you said, of those 20, often 7 will be like, my teacher made that math game. I'm going to go and make my own game, right? Because they get inspired and everything. And then they may not make a math game. They probably end up making like, the makeup or the Halloween game. But that flywheel of content creation starts to happen where the makers share with the players, and then a portion of the players become makers, and then it just grows exponentially. So our 5 largest user bases are Pakistan, US, Saudi, Nigeria, and Indonesia. And the wildest thing that has been that on Breshna, you can make a game in any language. So teachers and content creators around the world are making video games in their own languages with their own assets, for their own audience. And it's just been amazing. So what Canva did for design, TikTok did for video, we're doing for video games.
I do want to double click on paid acquisition is less than $1 per user that comes on. That is, to me, I hear that, that's just a testimony of how good your product is or how much people love using your product, because you can't even run paid ads to get acquisition under $1. Like, it's extremely hard to do unless you have an absolutely great product. So that is incredibly impressive.
Thank you so much for highlighting that, Connor, because again, I think, traction and go-to-market and product market fit is something that's like so important for founders. We tried to do ads and I the CAC was anything between $7 to $12. And we were like, this is not scalable. And so instead, what we realized with Breshna, the biggest bottleneck is actually disbelief. People are like, this is too good to be true. So like the thing is, they're like, there's no way I can make a video game in 15 minutes, right? So what we realized was that we needed social proof and we needed are super users to charge their own communities, right? Because like an Instagram ad is like, trust me, you
Yeah.
can make a game. They were like, nah, like, and this is especially true. So the kinds of games on Breshna are hyper casual games, right? Like the genre. I mean, you can
What do
make
you mean by
serious.
hyper casual?
So like think about Candy Crush, trivia games, puzzle games, right? Like the genre of like mobile gaming, casual gaming.
Mm.
And the interesting thing is the average mobile game player in the US is actually a 36-year-old woman,
Really?
often playing something like Candy Crush on the Metro, right? And that is
Right.
so different than the stereotype that we have of a gamer who's like, probably some 22-year-old in a basement playing Call of Duty for 7 hours, pizza boxes all around him, right? And everything.
Right.
So it's like really interesting because if you look at all of the game maker platforms within the market, they're mostly low code, not no code. Right. So for instance,
Right.
if you have mod.io, Unreal Engine, like BuildBox and all of these are amazing tools, but they're for game developers. So they make game development easy, but they require that basic knowledge of game development. And even if you look at the no code ones like Roblox or Minecraft or Sandbox, these all can be no code, but they have a very steep learning curve. Right. So you
Right.
can't just go into it, build a game and dip out of it in the first 15 minutes. Like it's hours and hours that you put into it. There's a steep learning curve and everything. So often this demographic of especially female gamers or even content creators that are on TikTok and everything, they get left out because they're content creators, but they don't see themselves as gamers. So it's a very interesting gap. If you just want it to be no code and completely flat, you almost have to empower them because they don't see themselves as game makers. They see
Okay.
themselves as content creators, but they don't see themselves as game makers. So that's where we brought in our ambassador model. And we said, you know what, we can't do this convincing. But if you see your aunt being like, I made a game on Breshna, trust me, you can make a game on Breshna, that works so much better than me being like, no, trust me, you'll make a game in 15 minutes. So our ambassador model is what led to that explosive user growth. And the reward mechanism there is anything between 0.25 to $1. And that's the highest it's been. And our CAC is usually less than $1 for the explosive growth we've had.
And that's what helps you scale and continue to grow. You talked about no code AI, basically making games no code. And the big issue is that people want to make games, but they don't have the technical skills of making a game. So with no code, can you explain more on the technical aspect, how someone without the skill can then create a game, and also how they can create it in under 15 minutes too?
Absolutely. So what we did, Connor, was we were like, okay, if we remove the skills, time, and cost barriers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyone comes on Breshna, and what we've done is we have game templates, right?
Okay.
So for instance, if you want to make a run and catch game, so the basic game mechanic is an avatar is running through a background and catching some things and dodging other things, right?
Yep.
Now, it could be a unicorn, it could be a frog, it could be Super Mario, right? Like whoever that is, like there's an object that's running, and then the background could be safe space, jungle, classroom, wherever. And then the collectible items could be even numbers or odd numbers. They could be flags of countries. They could be periodic table elements. They could be logos of companies. So like the collectible and non-collectible. So if you think about it, the underlying game mechanic is the same, right? And everything, which is it's a run and catch game where an avatar is running horizontally across the screen, catching some things, dodging other things. So what we've done is we have pre-coded 21 different game mechanics, right? So whether it's a run and catch game, a space invader game, a tile matching game, a jigsaw puzzle game, you want to make your own Wordle, you want to make your own crossword puzzle, you want to make your own, scavenger hunt game, you want to make your own maze game. So basically all of the basic game mechanics, we have them, and we're actually adding 2 to 3 templates every quarter on the platform. And we're even going to open it up to indie developers so we can really scale up how we get our templates going. But the big idea is that the underlying game template is the same. And then when you come into it on the design side, you have all of these assets. So again, avatars, backgrounds, collectibles, music. We have 3,500 assets from our side, but you can upload your own. So we could literally take a picture of this screen right now and turn it into the background of a game.
That's
we could
awesome.
just go to Breshna and upload and be like, hey, you know what? I don't know. I was at the Niagara Falls and I wanted to make a Mythbuster game about the Niagara Falls. And here's a picture I took of the falls. They upload that as a background. And then, here's me as an avatar with my Mythbuster game or something. So that's the big idea, is just allowing people, they don't need coding. They don't need design skills. They just go on Breshna.io. They create an account and then they choose any of these templates. And those templates can then be used for any kind of game, educational, marketing, social impact, whatever you want.
And that helps speed up the process too of them creating the game and then getting it out there. So in the case of a teacher, her students can then use it. So she doesn't have to spend, 48 hours working on the game over the course of maybe 2 months to try and finally create the game. And the game already works because these templates are already proven with other users using the templates.
Exactly. I mean, so interestingly, Connor, on average, a mobile game can cost around $100,000, 3 months, and a large skill team, right, to make that game. On our end, we say, hey, you can do that with $0, 15 minutes, and you as a person can make that game, right, and everything. So exactly like you said, the teacher can make the game herself. She can go into the classroom and say, hey, guys, today we learned about multiple. So 10 of you make a game on multiples of 3. These guys will make a game on multiples of 4. And these guys will make a game on multiples of 5. And then they all swap the game because everyone can make a game in less than 15 minutes. So it's being used as homework, as classroom, as project. People can co-create game. So, I mean, Breshna has a lot of use cases, but when you're building for everyone, you're building for no one. You got to start somewhere. So EdTech and content creators has been just our super users where we've seen so much stickiness. That's kind of where we're doubling down on the game maker side.
Is there a specific grade range that you see kind of the most amount of users within the super users?
It's very interesting because like the youngest user on Breshna that has made a game is 4 years old.
Really?
And the oldest that we have is 67, right? So it's like, that's very, very wide range, right? And everything. Yeah. So it's like, I mean, again, it really depends on the content you put in it, right? Like you can make a diversity and inclusion game. You can make a game about like, cancer research. I mean, a Mythbuster game and everything. So like, topics can be very serious. Topics can be like, again, as basic as even and odd numbers. But it is interesting within schools that kind of like that primary and secondary level is where kids just love it, right? Because they're getting used to technology. They're in the world of Roblox. They are content creators at heart. This is the generation of content creators. And finally, the teacher doesn't have to peel them away from video games. If anything, the teacher is like, hey, you know what? Make your own video game. And that's where their ownership is wild. Like we did a little session with Girl Scouts and it was supposed to be an hour session and we taught them Breshna and they would not leave because they were like, no, I mean, they kept playing each other's games and then they kept building on their games because there's that ownership of, hey, play my game. This is a game I just created.
Well, I do want to pivot. You have a 3-tier product stack. So you have Breshna, then you have Breshna Blitz, and then you have the Breshnaverse. So can you talk about the 3 products and where they differentiate and why they're all super important for the overall ecosystem that you're creating?
Yeah. So Connor, when we started, it was supposed to be Breshna. It was like, all right, here's Breshna, cool story, like the Canva for video games, and we'd wrap it up. And that's the no-code side. And then when we started building, one of the things we realized was, so right now it's a URL link, right? So you get your game and you can send it on WhatsApp, you can put it on your website, you can embed it in your own app, wherever you take it. It's almost like a YouTube video. But these teachers were like, hey, I've made 10 games on Breshna, right? I want one place where I can showcase these games and also monetize them. So I want to be able to like bring my community in one place. And then this is the world of like 3D and metaverses and all of that. So people were like, the 2D games are awesome because I want to make simple games, but then I would love like a really fancy 3D world where I can showcase these games. And that's when we were like, all right, you know what? We need a virtual 3D carnival, which is the Breshnaverse, which is Web3 enabled, where then these people, these game makers are able to kind of like showcase their games, but then also monetize them. So each game maker can have their own carnival stand. So for instance, if you've made 10 games on Breshna, you have your own carnival stand. People can come to your carnival stand and play your games and you can decide how you want to monetize them. So that showcase, so it's like the create part is on the no-code Breshna side, but once you've made your game, you showcase it and monetize it within the Breshnaverse. So it's kind of like, imagine a TikTok in like a 3D environment where you're being exposed to other people's content, but at carnival stands.
So do you think in the future there's going to be like a math section over here and then maybe an English section and then a science section? So like you can theoretically spend 8 hours in the math section and learn a lot while also having a ton of fun because you're just playing a bunch of different games, talking about a bunch of different subjects within math.
Exactly. So within the 3D world, you're walking around at this carnival, you're taking rides, you're like at the cotton candy machine, you're like, doing all of that. But then you're also playing video games. And we're also going to have a phone version, which is not 3D, all of that, but just like swiping
Okay.
through very much the TikTok style, right? Like you went into math game and you're just swiping one math game after another, whichever one you like, because these are light touch games, right? So like each game you finish in like 2 minutes, 60 seconds. You play the game, you move on to the next, move on to the next, move on to the next. So it's going to be really interesting because on the creation side, we made these games, but now on the distribution side, we're helping our game makers be like, here's a library, here's a web-based library, here's the mobile app, and then here's the Breshnaverse if you want to go full on wild and actually like go into the carnival and showcase and monetize your video.
So now, putting on the investor hat, because you're raising via Reg CF on Republic, the investor is thinking, this sounds great, but this sounds too good to be true. How are you making money? So can you walk us through the business model and how you're going to make money?
100%, Connor. So one of the things that we prioritize, so like it's almost like 2021 was more like, all right, MVP. 2022 was fundraising. So we've already raised a seed round of $2.5 million from investors like Paris Hilton, Randy Zuckerberg, Bill Ackman's family office, a bunch of Web2 and Web3 VCs and angels. And that gives us runway for the next 27 months. So we've gone through around 2.5 years and we still have runway for another 27 months because we're a very capital efficient team. I lead a team of 25 developers and designers, but most of them are based out of Pakistan. So it's high quality, but very capital efficient and everything. We keep our burn very, very low. So we're able to continue building. And one of the things that we're now focusing on, so like 2022 was fundraise, 2023 was let's get user growth. Like let's understand where it's sticking, what our super users are, what are the things they really, really want. And now 2024, we have 4 recurring revenue channels that are going to start to unlock. So the first one is very basic. It's subscription, right? Think about the Canva model. So freemium. You can make a game on Breshna, but if you want a custom URL, you want the premium avatars, you want a really fancy template and everything, $8 a month, you're now a premium subscriber. The other piece of it is actually immersive advertisements within the Breshnaverse. So once the Breshnaverse launches, you have your cotton candy machine, you have the ride, you have the roller coaster. There's so much digital space, real estate for ads, immersive ads within the Breshnaverse. That's a big one that's going to come in. And then there's also digital land sales. So all of these carnival stands, they're actually, they live on the blockchain. So you're able to own your own digital land, your own carnival stands, very much like the Web3 metaverse play. And then the last one, which is very interesting, is rev share. So each of these creators, when they're monetizing their games, we take a 35% cut, right? So if I'm going to take $1, I'm a math teacher, I made this game. If you play this game, it's going to be $1, 35 cents goes to Breshna for giving you all that space and everything. So 4 recurring revenue channels, subscriptions, advertisements, digital land, and rev share. And that's kind of what we're expecting. We're actually expecting profitability by the end of this year, $800K in ARR. And then by the end of 2027, we're going to exceed $30 million in annual revenue total. So we have all of those calculations and we can back it up with real math because we have the unit economics now nailed down of like what it costs us to get a user, what's our burn, and then understanding LTV and all of that stuff. So it's going to be really exciting.
So you have, how many, active monthly users do you have on the platform?
Yeah. So we're actually getting around 1,000 game makers. But then at the moment, we're getting more than 1 million game clicks per month, right?
Per month?
On the user side, it's around 1,000, which that are going to come in and that make their games and everything. But on the gameplay side, interestingly, we're now doing partnerships with telcos. We have a partnership with one of the largest telcos in Pakistan where they're powering their entire entertainment section through Breshna. Jazz is one of the largest ones. And on a monthly basis, we're getting around 1 million game clicks on these games and everything, right? So it's just one of those things where on the gameplay side, it's much, much faster. And then on the game creator side, it's around 1,000 game makers per month.
And talking about partnerships, do you see potential partnerships with school districts, school counties kind of going forward since, teachers are part of your super user group or super customer group?
Yeah, very interesting question, Connor. So I think edtech sales in the US are an interesting beast, right? And we've actually, like, even if you look at Kahoot and places, they actually started at the teacher level. So like a very B2C level, and then kind of ramped up to B2B, especially US centric. So internationally, we're doing partnerships with schools, like one of the largest school systems in Asia. They have more than 300,000 full-time students. That's an MOU that's getting signed this month. We're super excited about that. So internationally, we're doing a lot of those, large edtech partnerships in Saudi and Pakistan and all of that. I'm going to say in the US, at the moment, it's more B2C, just because the sales funnel and the cycle is like a lot longer and all of that.
Yes.
But, we just have so many more lower hanging fruits right now. We're going to grab those and then kind of come back, because you just require a certain savviness, edtech savviness to make sales within the education sector in the US.
Well, it probably requires a lot more focus, a lot more time. And you can worry about that as you scale and get bigger and bigger, right? Then you can start going after those schools. But right now, like you said, start going after the more of the low hanging fruit. Now, I am curious, what's been the biggest challenge so far with Breshna?
Very interesting. So to us, I felt like it was going to be like, what I was saying, the behavior change, right?
Okay.
Because a lot of times people are like, wait, I'm not a gamer, so why would I make a game,
Right.
right? And everything. So like, I think this idea of seeing games as a means of communication, seeing games as the next social media tool. So I think it was almost like people were like, yo, that's wild. And then once they make their first game, then they're just like, now I can make a game for my kid. Now I can make a game at work. Now I can make a game for this, make a game for this. So it's almost like that TikTok for, video games, because before TikTok, people were like, why would I do the same dance that everyone,
Right.
like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I getting online and recording myself doing a dance trend and everything? So I think there was a little bit of that behavior change, especially amongst the non-gamer, non-tech world. Even though there's 1 billion video game players around the world, there's only 200,000 people making. And that's why you don't see a lot of diversity in games. It's the same, New York City skyline and the yellow cap in every single game and everything. So it was like, I think there was a huge, huge ability there. And then honestly, the other thing, Connor, the challenge is there are so many avenues that focus. Like, I just have to be brutally selective, and that's kind of hard for a founder, because you're like, oh my God, like we could do this and this and this and this. And all of these other, like right now, there's dentists that are using QR codes in their office. And then you scan the QR code and you're playing a Breshna game on dental hygiene. There are like conferences that are doing QR codes around, like, the next speaker that's coming up, here's a game that you can play about them and everything. So there's so many use cases that you need a discipline, which has been really hard, because it's like, I'm like that and that. It's like, you want to chase all of the opportunities. But again, if you're building for everyone, you're building for no one. So I think that discipline of saying, all right, let's start with ed tech. Again, like you said, which region, where do you start? Where are those really easy traction points before then, you start catering to everyone?
What is your process like being selective about which avenue you pick? Because I would imagine when you're being selective, some avenues you can see a lot of long-term potential, but it's maybe extremely risky, or the likelihood is a lot harder. So how do you balance kind of success or short-term probability of this avenue working versus the long-term potential? Can you walk me through your process and how you kind of analyze those two?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of an art. I think with founders, it's more like, you're building the plane as you're flying it.
Yeah.
So some of it is just like, you wing it. But I do think that there's some very intentionality around the portion and the kinds of bets you take, right? So I think there's a lot of safe bets that we see the revenue right here, where we're like, okay, this will transfer into revenue. So we're like, especially this telco partnership, which is so interesting, because if you asked me on day one, hey, would telcos be on anywhere on the business model? I would have been like, what are you even talking about? This is a content creation platform, right? So that B2B telco partnership thing, that was really interesting to me, that telcos would just want customized video games for their user engagement and everything. So that's actually one that's turning into revenue very fast, right? So that's kind of our cash cow, low hanging, like the model makes sense, the growth is there, let's go after that. Then there's the edtech model, which is kind of in the middle, right? And everything. But like pricing can be so different. Like, who is your customer? Who is your user? Who are you charging? Is it the school? Is it the parents? All of that and everything. So that kind of like requires a bit of work, but somewhere in the middle where you're saying it's like, it is good because, you can get users, you can get revenue, but you're also learning in the process. And then there's some of these bets that you're like, I know this is going to be huge. One of our long-term visions is the Fiverr for video games, because we think there will be a world where there will be a massive population of game creators that know how to use Breshna. And there will be people, organizations that are going to have bids of like, hey, I'm a not-for-profit that works on animal welfare. I want 3 games created tomorrow for a rally or something. Can someone make these games? And that's when you do this matching and everything, right? So we know that's a huge potential, but that's one of those that we're like, kind of investing in, but letting it simmer as we go up and everything. So I feel like it's almost like a percent, like you can't do either or, but you kind of like, prioritize. I mean, obviously profitability, revenue, monetization, that's a huge focus this year. So that's going to be our North Star. But then obviously trying to keep some of these open, at least, even if it's not all of our time, spending sometimes intentionally on these long-term bets.
Yeah, kind of figuring how you want to allocate your time and focus accordingly in order to accomplish your goals and hit your marks, whatever you set for the year. And you said by the end of the year, 800,000 annual recurring revenue.
Yeah.
So that brings me to the question, why are you raising on Reg CF on Republic?
I love that question. So I think, Connor, when I started fundraising, it was like, all right, raise money from strategic investors, like most of them are accredited investors, and then off you go, right? And then you go and build and everything. And one of the things that I realized, as we started doing this was that community, the teachers that are using Breshna, the content creators that are talking about Breshna, our ambassadors who are going out and sharing Breshna. If you look at all of the successful tech startups, especially the pre-reg ECF world, when equity crowdfunding was not a thing, you would have all of these founders do exits or IPO, and guess who would make a lot of money? The investors. And then also the founders, right? So you would have these big yacht parties, where everyone's on the yachts, but it's like, it's the investors and the founders. And guess who's cheering you on and sending likes on LinkedIn on that one post you do of like, hey, we had an exit, or here's our TechCrunch article. But your community is like kind of standing on the sidelines, saying, hey, kudos, off you go and everything. And to me, Breshna is all about breaking barriers. We broke the cost, time, and skills barriers behind making games. And now we're breaking the investment barrier. Like, why is it that only people who are accredited investors, wealthy individuals, more than 1 million in net wealth, why are those the only ones that can be on the cap table? Why should there be a minimum check size? Like, I have users that are so passionate about Breshna, but they can only put in $100. Why not let them own a slice of Breshna? So for us, the Reg CF that's happening right now, this is actually our second one. So we did a Republic round very early on, and we got 200,000 from around 300 people.
That's awesome.
And I'm telling you, Connor, some of those people are way more active, and the ownership that they have of Breshna, they may have put in $100, but the value add that they bring is sometimes higher than someone who puts in like $50,000 and everything, right? So I think fundraising and investors, sure, capital is a big part of it, but I think community building is a key initiative. And we're gearing up for a Series A. Given our explosive user growth and our product map, we've gotten a lot of interest for a really large Series A next quarter. And there is such a thing as too late for ECF, I believe. At some point in time, you kind of have to wrap it up. So just before we did the Series A, I wanted to have one last opportunity for our community to jump on the rocket ship before we close doors. And it was like, hey, you know what? Even if it's $100, I want my community to be able to own a slice of Breshna so that, next thing, if we make it big, again, it's a risky asset. But if we make it big, I want my community to be standing on the mountaintop with me, not cheering from down below.
At the yacht party, right?
At the yacht party. Exactly.
Well, and I do want to say, Paul Graham has a great quote saying, you would much rather have 100 advocates than 100,000 customers. And Reg CF does that same thing where it turns customers into investors into advocates, and they contribute so much to the growth and the awareness of your brand and your startup. So I think that's a great point. I do want to ask though, you're planning on raising a Series A. The current valuation for the Reg CF is $50 million. You know what the valuation for the Series A is going to be around?
Yeah, so we closed our seed round at a 45 million post money, right? And everything. So, and that was last year, 2022. We now have the Reg CF open at 50 million. We didn't go insane. And also it's bear market mechanics change and everything. The Series A conversations currently, and again, the Series A price round, it's a very different beast. You have to get your lead investor. But just the conversations are in that 60 to 80 million range. And that's kind of where we're looking at it. We want to dilute around 10%, during the Series A. So that's kind of what we're looking at. But again, I'm not going to say we have follow-on commitments from our current investors, but we don't have a lead investor yet, right? So it's not written in stone, but that's kind of the range we're looking.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple questions left. Obviously, this isn't your first time being an entrepreneur. When was your first taste of being an entrepreneur?
So interestingly enough, when I started my gaming studio, right?
Yep.
As a not-for-profit, as a side gig. And God, I have so much to say, Connor, about this idea of quitting your job, to become a founder, where day one, you're on a ramen diet and that's all you need to do. I actually think side gigs are a great way of taking time to learn about the problem, familiarize yourself with the problem. And interestingly enough, Alexis Ohanian talks about this. Service-based companies often pivot into startups, right? Because when you're service-based, you're working. So when we were a gaming studio, when we were the ones building games, we were able to understand what kinds of games people were asking for, what those games needed to have, where was the barriers. And interestingly enough, the biggest barrier was actually the procurement department, right? The vendor process, all of that and everything. It wasn't the game making itself. And that's when we realized people didn't want the Call of Duty for menstrual health. They wanted the bingo. They wanted the climate bingo. They wanted the catch the pads with a pair of undies, and everything. And that's kind of what was appealing. And I think that really gave us a lot of familiarity. But I have to say, running a service-based company, like a small business or like a service-based studio or a not-for-profit, and being the founder of a venture-backed tech startup that's on that timeline of explosive growth are two very different beasts. So even though I might not be a first-time entrepreneur, being a first-time founder, the biggest difference is that time, right? And everything. Because it's on the service-based studio, we were averaging around 200K in ARR. And that was chill, right? That was hey, we were more than covering our payroll and everything. And that's all good. But when you kind of come into this world of explosive user growth, all right, now how much, the multiples, when are you hitting profitability? What are the multiples? What is your valuation? Where's your exit strategy? You have to wrap all of this up within 7 years, right? And everything. And then kind of get there at that 10x, 20x, 40x multiple. So I feel often founders, when they're fundraising, they're not able to think about that scale. Not every business is venture backable. You have to be able to show that scale of growth and valuation and the multiples of revenue. Because other than that, it's just not, it's a different ballgame. So I think that framework and that mindset, it's a different world.
You have to have the potential, but then it's also a race against time to achieve that potential. So it's kind of there's a lot going on. But talking about time, what's your vision for Breshna 10 years down the road?
So for me, it's 100 million people should be able to tell their stories through video games, right? I think this is going to be the TikTok for video games. I think every other person is going to be able to be oh yeah, I'm going to make a game on Breshna, and it's not going to matter what language they speak, what skills they have, what design, how much money they have, where they live, none of that, right? And everything. It's just going to be, I think video games are a universal language, and I don't see why every single person should be able to make a game, not just play a game. So my goal is 100 million people should be able to tell their stories through video games.
That's awesome. Well, Mariam, thank you for coming on. Where can people find you? And then you say you build in public a lot. So where's the best place to find you, follow you, join along in the journey?
Absolutely. So, the first place which has all of our information and the most updated information right now is our Republic campaign. So that's what is it? Is that republic.com/Breshna? So that's just plain. It's on the Republic page. That also has the links to all our socials. But then we're on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all of those as Breshna Game. So, it's you can find us there. And then Mariam Nusrat on LinkedIn. I actually share all of my founder stories, all the war stories, the good, bad, and the ugly for fellow founders, fundraising tips, how are you a first-time founder who's based out of DC, doesn't have any VC connections, how every single investor on my cap table can be mapped back to a cold outreach. So I think all of those stories I share on LinkedIn. So anywhere where we're across all of the socials, YouTube, again, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Breshna Game.
Well, Mariam, thank you for coming on. I love Breshna. I mean, I've been absolutely fascinated this entire interview. It's so exciting, and I'm going to be so excited to watch and follow Breshna as you finish the Reg CF, but then also as you go on to the Series A and 10 years down the road when you have 100 million game creators and users. So,
Game on.
Mariam, yeah, game on. But thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. And for all those listening, we'll see you next time on Next Big Thing HQ. So long.